The kennel door opened, and Titan exploded through it like a missile. 90 pounds of Belgian Malinois. Full speed. No hesitation. Every seal in that yard took one step back. Captain Elena Ward took none. She didn't raise her arms. She didn't reach for anything. She just looked at that dog charging straight at her and whispered a single word no one else on that base had ever heard. Titan stopped so fast his claws tore lines in the concrete. Then he sat down at her feet. If you've ever watched someone walk into a room and immediately own it without saying a word, subscribe to this channel, follow this story all the way to the end, and drop your city in the comments. I want to see how far this story travels. Senior Chief Marcus Cole had been with Naval Special Warfare for 19 years. He had buried teammates. He had stood in front of foreign dignitaries with blood still drying under his fingernails. He had looked into the eyes of men who had survived things that shouldn't be survived and known exactly what kind of soldier was standing in front of him. He could read people. That was not arrogance. That was 19 years of staying alive in environments where misreading a person got people killed. So when Captain Elena Ward walked through the gate of the Naval Special Warfare training facility at Coronado. On a gray Tuesday morning, Marcus read her the way he read everyone. Quickly, completely, without mercy. 29 years old, 5'6", brown hair pulled back, no ribbons on her chest beyond the bare minimum. One backpack, a folder of transfer documents tucked under her arm. No one with her, no one waiting for her. She stopped at the center of the yard, looked around once without expression, and then stood still. That was it. That was the read. Marcus said nothing. He folded his arms and turned back to the morning briefing. Behind him, Petty Officer First Class Danny Ruiz leaned toward Lieutenant Jake Harmon and kept his voice low. "That's the K-9 specialist they sent us." Harmon didn't look up from his tablet. "Apparently. She looks like she just walked off a college campus." "She might have." Ruiz shook his head slowly. "Command wants us to integrate a new K-9 unit before the overseas evaluation. We have 8 weeks. 8 weeks, and they send us someone who looks like she's never been downrange a day in her life." Harmon finally looked up. He watched Elena for a moment. She still hadn't moved. She was standing in the middle of the yard with that folder under her arm, waiting for someone to acknowledge her, and she didn't look bothered by the wait at all. "She doesn't seem nervous," Harmon said. "That's worse," Ruiz replied. "Nervous means they know what they don't know. He nodded toward her. "That's someone who thinks they belong here." "Maybe she does." "Jake. She's a K-9 officer attached to a rear support unit. She has never served with a Tier 1 element." Her file had exactly 4 lines of operational history, 3 of which were administrative rotations. "This is a SEAL team. We don't do charity assignments." Harmon said nothing more. Marcus finally walked toward her. He stopped 6 feet away. He looked at her transfer documents, then back at her face. "Captain Ward. Senior Chief Cole?" She said it the way you say a fact, not a greeting, not a performance, just confirmation that she knew who he was. That alone made Marcus pause. "You've read our personnel structure," he said. "I read everything before I arrive anywhere." "Good habit. It's a necessary one." He studied her for a moment longer. She didn't shift her weight. She didn't look away. She didn't try to fill the silence with something impressive. "We have a situation with the K-9 unit," Marcus said. "I read that too." "Then you know what we're dealing with. A Belgian Malinois named Titan," she said. "Male, 4 years old, 88 pounds. Trained through the Naval Working Dog program in Lackland before reassignment. 2 handler incidents in the past 6 months. 1 handler requested medical leave. 1 requested permanent transfer." Marcus raised an eyebrow slightly. "That's the public record," he said. "Yes. The public record is incomplete." She didn't react to that. She simply waited. Marcus looked at her for 3 more seconds. "Drop your bag. I want you to meet Titan before we go any further." The kennel facility sat at the east end of the training yard. 3 other military working dogs were housed there. 2 German Shepherds, 1 Labrador used for detection. All well adjusted. All running current certifications. All working. And then there was Titan's kennel at the end of the row. The SEAL team had gathered. Word traveled fast in a unit that small. Nobody said they were coming to watch. But somehow 9 operators were finding reasons to be in or near the kennel facility on a Tuesday morning. Ruiz leaned against the far wall with his arms crossed. Lieutenant Commander Beth Okafor, the unit's intelligence officer, stood near the door. She was the only one who looked genuinely curious rather than skeptical. Harmon stayed near the entrance. The kennel technician, a young enlisted man named Cody, walked Marcus and Elena down the row. Cody was nervous. Not in the way new recruits were nervous. He was nervous the way someone was nervous when they'd already seen something go wrong and were about to watch it potentially go wrong again. "He's been calm this morning," Cody offered, keeping his voice even. "Sometimes he's calm in the morning. It's the afternoon when things get difficult." Elena said nothing. "The last handler tried a standard approach," Cody continued. "He had all the right credentials, worked with Mals before. Titan he didn't accept it. The handler said it felt like Titan wasn't reacting to him as a threat. He said it felt like Titan was reacting to something specific." "What did he mean by something specific?" Elena asked. Cody glanced at her. "He never explained it exactly. He just said it didn't feel like aggression. He said it felt like grief." The word hung in the air. Marcus noticed Elena's jaw tighten just slightly. Just slightly. He filed that away. They reached Titan's kennel. The dog was standing at the back of the enclosure, not pacing, not vocalizing. Just standing facing the door watching. Ruiz had moved to where he could see clearly. He'd expected something obvious, lunging at the fence, barking the kind of display that told you immediately what you were dealing with. Instead, Titan just watched. His eyes found Elena through the chain link. And something changed. Ruiz couldn't have explained what changed. The dog didn't move. He didn't make a sound. But the air inside that kennel shifted. Something in Titan's posture went from stillness to attention. Not the tension before aggression, but something else. Something Ruiz had no framework for. "I want to go in," Elena said. The kennel technician looked at Marcus. "Captain," Marcus said, "the protocol is observation first, then." "I understand the protocol," Elena said. "I want to go in." The yard went quiet. Ruiz pushed himself off the wall. Harmon stood straighter. Marcus looked at Elena for a long moment. He had seen people try to prove things before, usually in situations where the proving was more about ego than judgment. And those moments almost always ended badly. But this wasn't that. He couldn't have said why, but it wasn't that. "Cody," Marcus said. Cody looked at him. "Open the door." The door swung open. Elena walked inside. She didn't walk fast. She didn't walk slow. She walked the way someone walked into a room where they'd been before, with the particular kind of ease that comes not from fearlessness, but from familiarity. Titan moved. He came forward from the back of the kennel in a straight line, and every person watching through that chain-link fence went rigid. Ruiz's hand moved. Harmon stepped forward. Marcus said nothing. Titan closed the distance between himself and Elena in 3 seconds, and then he was up front, paws on her shoulders, his face at her face, and the sound that came out of that dog was not growling. It was whining. High and broken and desperate, the kind of sound that didn't belong in a military kennel. The kind of sound that belonged to something with memory and longing and the particular pain of long waiting. Elena wrapped both arms around the dog. She pressed her face into his neck. She said something. Nobody outside could hear what she said, but Titan's whole body changed. The tension that had lived in him, that constant coiled alertness that the handlers had misread as aggression, simply released. His back legs folded, and he sat still, leaning against her, still pressing his face to hers. The yard was completely silent. Ruiz looked at Harmon. Harmon looked at Marcus. Marcus was watching Elena. After 30 seconds, she straightened up. She looked through the fence at the assembled team. Her eyes were dry. Her voice when she spoke was steady. His name isn't Titan, she said. No one answered. His name is Ghost. The debrief happened in the operations room. 9 operators, 1 intelligence officer, 1 kennel technician, and 1 captain, who had just done something none of them could explain. Marcus sat at the head of the table. He waited until everyone was seated before he spoke. "Captain Ward," he said, "explain." Elena put her folder on the table. She didn't open it. "4 years ago," she said, "I was attached to a classified joint task force operating in the northern corridor of an active theater. I was 25. My assignment was K9 tactical support. I was given an 8-week-old Belgian Malinois puppy as a training assignment." She paused. "I named him Ghost." The room was silent. "We trained together for 14 months. He completed his operational certification at 13 months, the fastest certification time in that facility's recorded history. We deployed together twice. We operated in environments where the threat level made standard handler protocol impossible. So we developed our own." She looked at her hands on the table. "Ghost learned 17 non-verbal commands. He learned vocal signals in 2 languages. He learned to work at distances standard K9 protocol doesn't cover." She looked up. "He learned how to find people who were buried alive." Beth Okafor leaned forward slightly. Ruiz had uncrossed his arms. "On the second deployment," Elena continued, "my partner, Staff Sergeant Raymond Howell, was killed during exfil. Improvised explosive. I was wounded but mobile. Ghost pulled me 300 yards to the extraction point." She said it without theater. She said it like she was filing a report. "After I was evacuated, the task force was dissolved. Ghost was classified as a unit asset and transferred without my knowledge or approval." "Without your approval," Marcus repeated. "Handlers don't have legal authority over animals classified as military equipment," she said. "I filed objections. They were noted and dismissed. I was told Ghost had been reassigned to a training program that would optimize his capabilities." Harmon spoke. "The conditioning program." Elena looked at him. "You know about it," she said. "I've heard rumors," Harmon said carefully. "It wasn't a rumor," Elena said. She finally opened the folder. She slid 3 pages to the center of the table. The program was designed to remove what they called emotional dependency in working dogs. The theory was that K9s who formed strong handler bonds became less effective when reassigned. So they ran a systematic desensitization protocol to break those bonds. She paused. What they actually broke was trust. The room absorbed that. "Ghost went through the program for 8 months, Elena said. At the end of the program, he refused all handler commands. Not because he was aggressive, because he had learned that people who approached him were trying to take something away from him. He had spent 8 months having every positive association methodically removed." Her voice was flat and controlled. "He became what they called an unsalvageable asset. He was transferred out of the program and reassigned to inventory. He went through 3 facilities in 2 years. At each facility, he was labeled difficult, dangerous, unstable." She looked around the table. "He's none of those things. He's a dog who learned that trust was a trap. He was waiting for someone who wouldn't prove him right." Silence. Then Ruiz said quietly, "You've been looking for him." "For 2 years. How did you end up here?" "I followed a paper trail," she said. "Transfer documents, reassignment orders, facility logs. I found a reference to an asset matching Ghost's physical profile in a naval working dog inventory 3 months ago. I requested a transfer to this unit." She looked at Marcus. "I told my commanding officer I was interested in Tier 1 K9 integration. That was true. I didn't tell him the rest." She paused. "I'm telling you now." Marcus looked at the pages on the table. He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "That explains the dog. It doesn't explain you." Elena looked at him. "You walked into that kennel," Marcus said, "without hesitation, without protective gear, without waiting for protocol clearance." You have been in this unit for approximately 45 minutes. You don't know this team. You don't know this base's safety procedures for that specific animal. You made a unilateral decision that could have gotten you seriously injured. He held her gaze. Tell me why I should accept that. Elena answered without blinking. Because I knew I wasn't going to get injured. How? Because I knew that dog. You hadn't seen that dog in 2 years. Animals change. Behavioral conditioning changes animals. You couldn't have known with certainty. Senior Chief, she said. He stopped. When Ghost and I were deployed together, there was a situation where I was pinned down in a building that was structurally compromised. I couldn't move. I had one radio that was cutting out. My partner was dead. Ghost found me through 3 floors of debris through smoke without a command. He found me because he remembered where I was supposed to be. She let that settle. He had been waiting in that kennel for 2 years. He remembered. That's not conditioning. That's not training protocol. That's a level of loyalty that doesn't get broken by a program. She paused. I knew I wasn't going to get injured because I knew what was in that kennel wasn't a dangerous dog. It was a dog who was waiting for exactly one person in the world. And today, for the first time in 2 years, that person walked through the door. The room was completely still. Ruiz looked at the table. His jaw was working slightly the way it did when he was processing something that was rearranging a previous conclusion. Harmon was looking at the transfer documents. Beth Okafor had her hands folded on the table, and she was looking at Elena with an expression that had moved well past curiosity into something that might have been recognition. Marcus leaned back in his chair. He said nothing for a long time. Then, you said the public record on this dog is incomplete. Yes. What's missing? His operational history, Elena said. Everything Ghost did under classified task force authority was redacted before his reassignment. The facilities that received him got a behavioral file and nothing else. They had no context for what they were looking at. They saw a dog with erratic responses to handler commands, and they made the only conclusion they could make with the information they had. She looked around the room. You've all done that. Nobody argued. You looked at Ghost, and you saw an unstable asset. You looked at the 2 injured handlers, and you saw evidence. You made a logical conclusion based on incomplete data. She kept her voice even. I'm not criticizing that. That's what you're trained to do. But the conclusion was wrong, and I can prove it. Marcus looked at her. How? Run the evaluation, she said. Full K9 integration assessment. Every test in the protocol, and then run the handler transfer component, put another member of this team on him. Not with me coaching. Cold. Watch what happens. Ruiz looked at Marcus. Marcus looked at Elena. You want us to run a full tactical assessment on a dog that has failed every formal evaluation for the past 2 years? Yes. With you as handler? Yes. And you're confident enough in what you just told us to stake your place in this unit on that evaluation? Elena held his gaze. I staked my place in this unit the moment I walked through that kennel door, she said. Everything after that is just paperwork. The team spent the rest of that morning doing what trained operators always did when confronted with something they didn't understand. They talked about it behind closed doors. Not to Elena. She was given quarters and a facility orientation. She spent the afternoon in the kennel with Ghost, moving quietly through basic obedience patterns that looked like nothing from the outside, just a woman and a dog doing slow, ordinary things together. Cody watched them for an hour before he had to leave for another duty. When he walked past Marcus in the corridor, he stopped. Senior Chief. Cody. That dog, Cody said carefully, has been here for 4 months. I've worked with that dog every day for 4 months. I've never once seen him do what he did this morning. What did you see this morning? Cody thought about it. Relief, he said. He walked on. In the operations room, the team was less quiet about it. Ruiz had both hands on the back of a chair and was working through it out loud. Okay, let's say everything she said is accurate. Let's say the dog is what she says he is. She still walked into a kennel with an animal that put 2 trained handlers in medical care. That's either exceptional judgment or reckless confidence. If it's reckless confidence, we have a problem in a completely different direction. It wasn't reckless, Harmon said. Everyone looked at him. He shrugged. You watched her. She wasn't performing certainty. Reckless confidence performs. She was just certain. There's a difference. Enlighten me. Reckless confidence is loud. It needs witnesses. She didn't look at us once when she was walking in. She was completely focused on the dog. She wasn't trying to prove something to us. She was doing something she already knew the outcome of. He paused. That's a different psychology entirely. Ruiz considered that. Even if the dog is solid, he said, she's still a rear support officer who has never operated with a Tier 1 element. We have 8 weeks before the overseas evaluation. I don't care how good her canine is, we need a handler who understands our operating environment. She deployed twice on a classified joint task force, Beth Okafor said from the far side of the room. Ruiz looked at her. Classified means I can't read it, he said. Classified means it happened, she replied. And her task force designation, if you look at the redaction pattern on her service record, which I have spent the past 2 hours doing, is consistent with a unit that operated at a threat level comparable to ours. The redactions aren't covering administrative rotations. They're covering something that someone very senior decided nobody needed to know about. She paused. She's not rear support, Danny. She's something we don't have a clearance level to read, at least not yet. The room absorbed that. Marcus, who had said nothing throughout the conversation, finally spoke. We run the evaluation, he said. Everyone looked at him. Full protocol. Tomorrow morning. Handler transfer component included. He paused. And I want her operational file submitted for a read-up request today. That'll take weeks, Ruiz said. I know, Marcus said. Run it anyway. He walked to the door, then he stopped. One more thing, he said. He turned back to the room. That word, she said, when the dog stopped charging. Does anyone know what it was? Silence. Nobody heard it clearly, Harmon said. I want to know what it was, Marcus said. Not for the record. I just want to know. He left. Harmon looked at Ruiz. Ruiz looked at the door Marcus had walked through. What kind of word stops a dog like that in mid-charge? Ruiz said. Nobody answered, because none of them knew. But somewhere at the east end of the base in a kennel that had been the loneliest 4 months of an animal's life, a dog was sleeping for the first time in 2 years without keeping one eye on the door. And the woman sitting on the floor beside him, back against the wall, watching him breathe, finally allowed herself to close her eyes. She had found him. Everything that came next, the skepticism, the evaluation, the team that hadn't decided whether to trust her yet, she would handle all of it. But tonight, that didn't matter. Tonight, he was home. And so, for the first time in a very long time, was she. Marcus Cole did not sleep well that night. This was not unusual for him. 19 years of operational tempo had rewired whatever mechanism controlled his sleep cycles, and he had long since stopped expecting 8 uninterrupted hours. What was unusual was the reason he couldn't sleep. It wasn't a mission problem. It wasn't a personnel problem. It wasn't a logistics issue, or an intelligence gap, or any of the 17 categories of trouble he was trained to manage. It was a woman sitting on the floor of a kennel. He'd walked past the facility at 2200 hours on his way back from the operations room. Standard habit. He made a circuit of the base perimeter before he turned in. The kennel lights were still on. He'd slowed without meaning to. Elena was exactly where he'd left her mentally, seated on the concrete floor, back against the wall, ghost asleep across her legs, all 90 pounds of him completely relaxed, rising and falling with the kind of deep breathing that took total safety to produce. She wasn't on her phone. She wasn't reading. She was just sitting there in the quiet, one hand moving slowly across the dog's back, watching him sleep, like she was memorizing something she'd been afraid she'd never see again. Marcus had stood there for 10 seconds. Then he'd walked on. Now, at 0430, he was at the operations table with a cup of coffee that had gone cold, reading Elena Ward's service record for the fourth time. The file was thin. Deliberately thin, which was itself a kind of information. Officers with full, unremarkable careers had thick files. Officers whose work lived in places that couldn't be documented had files that told you nothing, and told you everything about why they told you nothing. He found the deployment records, 2 overseas rotations, both redacted to the point where only the dates remained. He found the medical records from the evacuation Beth had referenced. Shrapnel to the left shoulder and upper back. 3 weeks of hospital recovery. Return to duty ahead of projected timeline. He found the commendation. It was a single line buried in a field of redactions, but it was there recommended for distinction. Classified review, pending decision, withheld pending unit, dissolution. She'd been recommended for a decoration and never received it because the unit she'd earned it with had been erased from the official record. Marcus set down the file. He picked up his cold coffee. He thought about what Beth had said. Classified means it happened. Then he thought about what Cody had said. One word. Relief. He thought about a dog that had failed every formal evaluation for 2 years, lying across a stranger's legs, like he'd been waiting for exactly that wait. At 0515, he sent a message to the team. Evaluation begins at 0700. All personnel present. Danny Ruiz arrived at 0650 and found Elena already in the training yard with Ghost. He stopped at the edge of the yard and watched without announcing himself. What he observed didn't look like preparation for a high-stakes tactical evaluation. It looked like 2 people having a conversation. Elena would move in one direction. Ghost tracked her. She'd stop. He'd sit before she signaled. She'd make a gesture so small Ruiz couldn't parse it from 30 feet away. Ghost would shift his position with a precision that made the movement look choreographed. It wasn't obedience. Ruiz had seen enough trained working dogs to know what obedience looked like. Obedience was compliance, the dog doing the thing because not doing the thing had consequences. What he was watching was something different. Ghost wasn't waiting to be told. He was anticipating. He was reading her the way a person reads another person, not for commands, but for intent. That was not supposed to be possible in a dog that had spent 2 years being systematically conditioned out of handler attachment. Ruiz stepped into the yard. Elena heard him. She didn't turn immediately, which meant she'd already clocked his position without looking a particular kind of spatial awareness that you didn't develop behind a desk. "Morning," she said. "You sleep in the kennel?" he asked. "Few hours." "Concrete floor." "I've slept in worse places." He stopped a few feet away. Ghost looked at him. Not with aggression, with assessment, the steady measuring look of an animal deciding where to place you in its understanding of the world. "He's not going to bite you," Elena said. "I know," Ruiz said. "I've been bitten by enough dogs to know the difference between a dog that wants to bite you and a dog that's just figuring out what you are." "What did you decide he is?" she asked. "Yesterday, before you knew the story." Ruiz thought about lying, decided against it. "Broken," he said. "I decided he was broken." Elena nodded slowly. Most people did. Most people were working with the information they had. "Yes," she said. She looked at Ghost. "That's exactly right. And the information was wrong." She paused. "That's worth knowing, I think. Not as a criticism, just as a fact worth sitting with." Ruiz was quiet for a moment. Then, "You're not what I expected." "What did you expect? Someone trying harder to impress us?" She almost smiled. "Not quite." "I'm not here to impress you," she said. "I'm here to do the job." "What if we decide you can't do the job?" She looked at him directly. "Then you'll be wrong," she said. "And the evaluation will prove it. And we'll go from there." Ruiz looked at her for a long moment. Then he looked at Ghost, who was still watching him with that steady, calibrating attention. "Okay," Ruiz said. "Just that. Okay." He walked to the far end of the yard to take his position for the evaluation. Ghost watched him go. Then he looked back at Elena. She exhaled once slowly. "I know," she said quietly. The dog pressed his shoulder against her knee. By 700, the full team was assembled. Marcus ran the briefing himself. "Full K-9 integration assessment," he said. "Standard Naval Special Warfare protocol. 7 components. Detection tracking area, search obstacle navigation, controlled aggression recall under pressure, and handler transfer." He paused on that last one. Handler transfer is the final component. Captain Ward will run the first 6. For the 7th, she hands off to a team member she has not briefed and has not coached. Cold handoff. Dog has to respond to a handler he's never worked with on commands he's never heard from that handler. He looked around. "I want clean observations. No interference. No commentary during the assessment." He met Ruiz's eyes, then Harmon's. "We observe and we evaluate. That's it." He looked at Elena. "Captain Ward, you ready?" "Yes, Senior Chief." "Then let's start." The detection component went first. 3 scent articles hidden in a search area. 2 decoys. Timer running. Ghost found all 3 in 4 minutes and 11 seconds. Nobody said anything, but Harmon noted the time on his tablet without being asked. The previous working dog record for that course was 6 minutes and 30 seconds. Nobody mentioned that either. The tracking component went second. A scent trail laid 40 minutes prior. 2 directional changes. 1 water crossing. Ghost worked the trail without hesitation. He didn't cast wide, didn't lose the line, didn't need redirection. He ran it like a thread through a needle, clean and straight and certain. At the water crossing, he paused. Just for a moment. 3 seconds, maybe 4. Ruiz saw it, and his jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Then Ghost crossed. Elena hadn't said a word. She hadn't signaled. She'd simply waited. He crossed and picked up the trail on the other side like the pause had never happened. Harmon made a note. The area search was next, and this was where the team started to get quiet in a different way. Not the skeptical quiet of people waiting for failure, but the focused quiet of people watching something that was rewriting a conclusion in real time. Ghost cleared the search area in 8 minutes. Standard protocol allowed 15. He flagged 4 targets, bypassed 2 decoys with such decisive disregard that 2 of the watching operators involuntarily exchanged a look. "He's not guessing," Beth Okafor said very quietly to no one in particular. Nobody answered because nobody needed to. Obstacle navigation was next. Physical course timed. Ghost moved through it like he'd run it 100 times. Which he hadn't. He'd never been on this course. Elena was running beside him, and Ruiz found himself watching her as much as the dog. She moved with the same economy she'd shown in the yard that morning. No wasted motion, no performance, no signaling to the audience that she knew what she was doing. She simply knew what she was doing, and she did it. 4 components complete, all 4 clean. And then the 5th component began. The controlled aggression test was the one that had defined Titan's Ghost's reputation. It was the test where the 2 handlers had been injured. The protocol was straightforward. The decoy enters the search area displaying threatening behavior. The handler commands the dog to engage. The dog engages. At a specific point in the engagement, the handler commands a hold, not a release. A hold which was harder. The dog had to maintain the bite without increasing pressure, without thrashing, without escalating. Then the handler commands a release and a retreat, and the dog had to break off cleanly and return to heel. The hold was the moment that separated a trained working dog from an uncontrolled animal. The hold was what Ghost had failed every time for the past 2 years. Not because he couldn't do it. Elena understood now with complete clarity why he'd been failing. He'd been failing because every handler who ran that component had tightened up at the exact moment the hold command came, and Ghost, who read human bodies the way other dogs read the wind, had felt that tightening and interpreted it the only way he knew how, as a threat, as another attempt to take something away. So he'd escalated. Because the one thing the conditioning program had not managed to remove was Ghost's core decision-making. He was not an animal that reacted. He was an animal that responded. And he had been responding consistently and rationally to the information he was given. The information had just been wrong every time. Elena set her feet. The decoy moved. She gave the command. Ghost launched. The sound of the engagement, the full committed contact of a Belgian Malinois doing exactly what it had spent 4 years training to do, made two of the watching operators take an involuntary step forward, and they weren't moving to intervene. They were moving closer because the power and precision of what was happening in front of them was simply arresting. The decoy worked the sleeve hard, putting real force into the drill. Ghost held. And then Elena's voice. Quiet, exact, familiar, the hold command. The old one. The one only she used. Ghost held. He didn't escalate. He didn't thrash. He maintained the bite with complete control, and every operator in that yard understood simultaneously that this was not a dog failing a protocol. This was a dog that had been waiting 2 years for someone to give him the right information. Elena's voice again. Release and retreat. Ghost let go. He turned. He came back to her side and sat. The decoy shook out his arm and nodded at no one in particular, with the expression of someone who had just been thoroughly professionally worked. The yard was silent for 4 seconds. Then Harmon said under his breath, "There it is." Ruiz said nothing, but he uncrossed his arms. 5 components. 5 clean performances. 1 left. The handler transfer. Marcus walked to the center of the yard. "Captain Ward," he said. "The protocol for this component requires you to step back completely. No commands, no signals, no position coaching. You hand the dog to the designated handler, and you walk to the far side of the yard, and you stay there." Understood. The designated handler will attempt to run Ghost through 3 basic commands: sit, stay, heel. If Ghost responds to all 3, the component is complete. Understood. The designated handler, Marcus said, is me. Elena looked at him. She said nothing. Marcus had been running SEAL teams for 7 years. He had worked with military working dogs before, though never as a primary handler. He knew the theory. He understood the mechanics. What he understood with particular clarity in this moment was that he was about to attempt to command a dog who had refused all handler transfer attempts for 2 years in front of his entire team. If it worked, the evaluation was complete, and Elena had done what she said she would do. If it didn't work, if Ghost refused, if he escalated, if the pattern repeated, then everything that had happened this morning was a single dog responding to a specific person, which was impressive but not tactically useful. Because in the field, handlers got separated from their dogs. In the field, the dog had to work with whoever was available. In the field, a K9 that only responded to one person in the world was a liability, not an asset. Marcus knew that Elena knew that. He suspected that was why she'd suggested this component herself. "Ready when you are," he said. Elena looked down at Ghost. Ghost was looking up at her. She crouched in front of him. She put both hands on either side of his face. She held his attention for a moment that felt to the watching team like a private conversation that didn't require words. Then she said something, quiet enough that only Ghost heard it. The dog held her gaze for 3 more seconds. Then he looked at Marcus. Elena stood up and walked to the far side of the yard without looking back. Marcus looked at the dog. Ghost looked at Marcus. For the first time in this entire evaluation, the outcome was not a foregone conclusion. Nobody in that yard knew what was about to happen. Marcus crouched down slowly. Not submission, just eye level, the way you approached an animal you were not trying to dominate, but to communicate with. "Sit," he said. Ghost sat. Someone exhaled audibly. "Stay." Ghost stayed. Marcus stood up, walked 6 feet away. "Heel." Ghost came to him, matched his left leg, stopped when he stopped. The yard was absolutely silent. Marcus looked at the dog beside his left leg, then across the yard at Elena. She was standing at the fence with her arms at her sides. She hadn't watched the last 30 seconds. She'd been facing away. Marcus understood that. She'd been facing away because she'd known it was going to work, and watching it would have meant something she wasn't ready to show them. He looked back at Ghost. Ghost was still watching Elena's back, waiting. "Good boy," Marcus said. He said it quietly, almost to himself. Then he straightened up and turned to the team. "Assessment complete," he said. The debrief was different from the one the day before. Same room, same table, same people. But the energy was completely different. Ruiz sat with his forearms on the table, leaning forward instead of back. Harmon had his tablet out but wasn't looking at it. Beth Okafor had a legal pad and was writing in it. Marcus stood at the front. "Results," he said. "Detection flawless. Time under record. Tracking flawless. Area search 8 minutes against a 15-minute standard, 4 targets, 0 false flags. Obstacle navigation clean. Controlled aggression, first clean result this animal has produced in any formal evaluation in 2 years. Handler transfer successful." He let that sit. "The evaluation," he said, "is a pass, a complete pass, which means the question now is not whether this K9 is operationally viable. We've answered that." He paused. "The question now is what this tells us about everything that came before it." The room was quiet. Then Beth put her pen down. "It tells us the documentation was wrong," she said. "Not falsified. Wrong. Every handler who worked with this dog wrote accurate accounts of what they observed. They just didn't have the context to understand what they were observing." "The program," Harmon said. "The conditioning program. We need to know more about it. If they ran this protocol on Ghost, they ran it on others." Marcus nodded. "I've already put in a request," he said. "It's going to hit walls. The program is buried." He paused. "We'll go around the walls." Ruiz was looking at the tabletop. "Danny," Marcus said. Ruiz looked up. "Say it." Ruiz breathed in slowly. "Then, I told Harmon yesterday that sending us a rear support officer was a charity assignment. I said it in front of half the team." He paused. "I was wrong. I was wrong about the dog and I was wrong about her." Marcus looked at him for a moment. "Yes," he said, "you were. I'm saying it so she can hear it, not so you can hear it." Marcus turned to Elena. She was at the far end of the table, hands folded in front of her, watching Ruiz, with an expression that was not triumphant and not gracious. It was something more complicated, the expression of someone who had expected to have to prove something, and had proven it, and was not particularly interested in celebrating that fact. "I hear you," she said. "I'm sorry," Ruiz said. "I know." "That's it, I know." The corner of her mouth moved. "What do you want me to say, Petty Officer Ruiz?" "I don't know, something. That you're not going to hold it against me." "I'm not going to hold it against you," she said. "I understood what you were doing. You were protecting your team. That's your job." She looked around the table. "Every person in this room looked at me and made a calculation based on available information. I would have done the same thing. I'm not here to litigate that. I'm here to do the job." She paused. "The job starts now." Ruiz looked at her for a long moment. Then he nodded. Once. The particular kind of nod that in a room full of operators meant more than most handshakes. "Tiens." After the debrief, Beth Okafor caught Elena in the corridor. "Can I ask you something personal?" Elena looked at her. "When they told you Ghost had been transferred," Beth said, "what did you do immediately? What was the first thing you did?" Elena was quiet for a moment. "I filed an objection," she said. "And when the objection was dismissed, I filed another one. And when that was dismissed, I started making phone calls," Elena said, quietly, "through channels that don't show up in official records." She paused. The answer was always the same. Ghost is a classified asset. His location is restricted. His records are restricted. You have no operational authority over his assignment." Her voice was flat and even. "I heard that for 2 years." "But you kept going." "Yes." "Why?" Elena looked at her. "Because he pulled me 300 yards, she said. Beth held her gaze. "Through smoke and debris in a compromised building, with no command, with no training protocol for what he was doing. He just found me and he pulled me." She paused. "You don't leave that behind. That's not something you file paperwork about and move on from. That's you just don't leave it behind." Her voice was still even, still controlled. "He didn't get to understand what happened to him. He didn't get to know why people started treating him differently. He didn't get to know where I was. He just woke up one day and everything was different, and nobody who came through his kennel door was someone he could trust." She stopped. "I wasn't going to let that be how it ended." Beth nodded slowly. "For what it's worth," she said. "I flagged your file the moment I saw the redaction pattern. I told Marcus there was more there." "I know," Elena said. "Thank you." "Don't thank me, just—" Beth paused. "There are more dogs in that program, aren't there?" It wasn't entirely a question. Elena looked at her. "Yes," she said. "There are." Beth held her gaze for a moment longer. Then she said, "Then let's get to work." That evening, Marcus found Ruiz in the equipment bay running maintenance on gear that didn't need it, which was what Ruiz did when he needed to think. Marcus sat on a bench across from him and was quiet for a while, which was what Marcus did when he was going to say something that mattered. Ruiz kept working. Finally, Marcus said, "She requested the transfer documents for Ghost 2 weeks before she submitted her own transfer request." Ruiz's hands slowed. "She wasn't looking for a position on this team," Marcus said. "She was looking for the dog. The team was what was attached to the dog." He paused. "She pulled 2 years of paper trails through restricted military inventory records, identified a single asset matching Ghost's profile in a naval working dog database, and arranged a valid operational transfer to this unit in order to get access to one kennel." He let that settle. "She didn't use any unofficial channels. She didn't break any protocols. She did it all clean through the system without a single flag." Ruiz set down the component he was holding. "That's," he said, then stopped. "Yeah," Marcus said. "That's not something you do in 2 weeks." "No," Marcus said. "She's been working toward this specific transfer for 8 months, minimum." Ruiz absorbed that. 8 months of planning to get to one dog, he said. 8 months of planning to get to one dog, Marcus confirmed. Ruiz was quiet for a moment. "Marcus," he said. "What did she say to him in the kennel before the handler transfer, when she crouched down and held his face? What did she say?" Marcus looked at him. "I was 6 feet away," he said. "I couldn't hear it." "But you have an idea." Marcus was quiet for a moment. "I think," he said carefully, "she told him it was okay to trust someone else for a little while, that she wasn't going anywhere, that he could let someone new in without it meaning she was leaving again." He paused. "I think she told him she'd still be there when the command was done." Ruiz stared at the floor. "That's not handler training," he said. "No," Marcus said. "It's not." He stood up. "Tomorrow we start integration," he said. "She's not a K-9 attachment to this unit anymore. She works with us directly. I want her in every operational briefing. The team's going to have questions." "The team has already been answered," Marcus said. "They just don't know it yet." He walked to the door. Ruiz picked up the component he'd set down, turned it in his hands. "Senior Chief," he said. Marcus stopped. "The other dogs in that program," Ruiz said. "If she's right about what they did to Ghost, if there are more of them in inventory somewhere labeled failed assets." He stopped. Marcus looked at him. "I know," Marcus said. He left. Ruiz sat alone in the equipment bay for a long time after that. Ghost had been waiting in a kennel for 2 years because a program designed to make him more effective had instead destroyed his ability to trust. Ruiz thought about all the things that got labeled failed, all the things that got transferred and reassigned and written off because the people responsible didn't have enough information to understand what they were looking at. He thought about what Elena had said. The conclusion was wrong. And I can prove it. He thought about what it took to spend 2 years fighting a system from the inside, filing objections that went nowhere, making calls that hit walls, finding a paper trail through restricted records and following it for 8 months, and arriving at a military base as a stranger carrying one backpack and a folder of documents, and walking into a kennel before anyone had decided whether to trust you. He thought about the word she'd said. That one word that stopped a charging dog in mid-stride. He still didn't know what it was, but he was starting to understand what it meant. It meant I know who you are, not what the records say, not what the program made you, not what the handlers who came after me decided you were. I know who you are. He sat with that for a long time. Outside the base was settling into its night rhythms. Somewhere across the yard in a kennel at the east end of the facility, a dog was sleeping deeply for the second night in a row. And somewhere in the quarters, assigned to a captain who had spent 2 years finding her way back to one specific kennel, a woman was finally getting some real sleep. The team had 8 weeks before the overseas evaluation. What none of them knew yet, what the morning would begin to reveal, was that the evaluation they needed to pass was not the one the Navy had scheduled. It was the one that was already coming for all of them. The read-up request came back in 6 days. Marcus had expected weeks. He'd been prepared for walls for bureaucratic delay for the particular institutional silence that surrounded anything classified above a certain threshold. 6 days meant someone on the other end had decided to move it. 6 days meant someone wanted this unit to know what they were looking at. He read the file alone at 0500 with the door to the operations room closed. When he finished, he sat for a long time without moving. Then he called Beth Okafor. She answered on the second ring. "You need to see something," he said. "How bad?" He looked at the file. "Not bad," he said. "Just significant. Get here before the team." She was there in 12 minutes. He slid the file across the table. She read it standing up, which was how Beth read anything urgent. She turned pages without speaking. About 2/3 through her hand slowed. She went back and reread something. Then she kept going. When she finished, she set the file down carefully. "She has a silver star," Beth said. "Classified," Marcus said. "Never formally presented." "Because the unit was dissolved." "Because the unit was dissolved," he confirmed. "The action that generated the recommendation happened during the second deployment, the one where Howell was killed, the IED event." He paused. "She didn't tell us the full account." "What did she leave out?" Marcus looked at the file. "She told us Ghost pulled her to the extraction point," he said. "She didn't tell us that before he did, that she went back into the building." Beth stared at him. "Howell was still in there," Marcus said. "Or she believed he was. She went back in with a compromised structure and an active secondary threat, and she spent 11 minutes in that building before she confirmed he was gone. Then she came out." He paused. "Ghost found her on the way out. Not at the extraction point. He went in after her." The room was very quiet. "She was wounded before she went back in," Marcus said. "Not after. The shrapnel was from the initial blast. She made that call with shrapnel in her shoulder." Beth put both hands flat on the table. "She didn't tell us any of that," she said. "No." "Why?" Marcus thought about it. "Because it wasn't relevant to her argument," he said. "She was making a case for the dog. Everything she told us was in service of that case. Her own record wasn't part of it." Beth looked at the file. "Marcus?" She said, "She's not a K-9 officer who got attached to a special operations unit. She is a special operations officer who was classified as K-9 support because that was the most tactically useful designation available at the time." "I know." This team has been treating her like an attachment. I know, Marcus said again. That changes today. Elena noticed the shift before anyone explained it. Integration week had started with the team working around her, not coldly, not deliberately, just with the practiced efficiency of operators who had established rhythms and didn't yet know where to fit a new variable. She'd been brought into briefings given operational context included in planning discussions. But there was a difference between being included and being integrated, and she felt that difference clearly without making it anyone else's problem. She'd been in rooms like this before. New to the team, unknown quantity carrying credentials that couldn't be verified at first glance. She knew how this went. You waited, you did your work, you let the team come to you in their own time. So when Ruiz fell into step beside her on the way to morning PT and said without preamble, "Tell me how you two ran the detection protocol during the second deployment," she understood that something had shifted overnight. Why? She asked. Because the way Ghost ran the detection component yesterday was unlike anything I've seen in a working dog evaluation. I've been at this long enough to know the difference between a dog that's executing training and a dog that's actually problem-solving. Ghost was problem-solving. I want to know how you taught him to do that. She looked at him sideways. It took about 8 months, she said. Walk me through it. She did. She talked while they ran. She talked about the early stages when Ghost was still a puppy, with more energy than focus, and how she'd learned to work with his natural drive instead of against it. She talked about the progression from basic obedience to operational utility, how she'd built each new skill on top of the last one, never moving forward until the foundation was solid. Ruiz listened without interrupting. She talked about the non-verbal command system. 17 signals developed over 14 months, because in certain operational environments, any vocalization was a liability. She talked about distance work, about the specific challenge of maintaining control over an animal at ranges where standard handler protocol became impossible. Then she said, "The detection work came from watching him operate in the field. He doesn't search the way trained dogs search. He reasons. He builds a picture from partial information and fills in the gaps. I stopped teaching him where to look and started teaching him why." Ruiz ran 4 more strides before he said anything. "You can't teach a dog why," he said. "You can if you spend enough time letting the dog teach you how they already think," she replied. He was quiet again. "Can you teach that to another dog?" he asked. "Slower," she said. "Without the same baseline, but yes." "Could you teach it to Ghost again on a different handler's signals?" And there it was. That was the question underneath all the other questions. She looked at him steadily. "That's what you're actually asking me," she said. "That's what Marcus is actually asking you," he corrected. "I'm just the one running next to you." She almost smiled. "Yes," she said. "I can do that." "How long?" "Depends on the handler." Ruiz glanced at her. "Hypothetically," he said, "if the handler was motivated." "Motivated helps," she said. "But it's not enough on its own. You need patience. You need the ability to be wrong and not react to being wrong. You need to understand that the dog isn't correcting you, the dog is giving you information." She paused. The handlers who failed with Ghost weren't bad handlers. They just tightened up when things didn't go as expected. Ghost read that as threat. It set off the pattern. And if the handler doesn't tighten up, then Ghost gives them everything he has, she said. That's who he is. He's not a difficult dog. He's a precise one. He requires precision back. Ruiz thought about that for the rest of the run. When they finished, he didn't say thank you, and he didn't say he'd pass it along to Marcus. He just nodded once in that particular way, and Elena understood that the conversation had accomplished what it needed to accomplish. She went to find Ghost. The briefing that changed everything happened at 1400 that same day. Marcus called a full team assembly. No external personnel, no kennel staff, just the core unit and Elena. He stood at the front of the room. 6 days ago, I submitted a read-up request on Captain Ward's classified service record, he said. That request was approved this morning. He looked around the room. I'm going to share the relevant information because this team operates on full situational awareness, and partial information compromises our function. He laid it out plainly. The classified task force. The 2 deployments. The building in the 2nd deployment. The 11 minutes the shrapnel. The commendation that never got presented. He said it all without editorializing. The room took it in. At the far end of the table, Elena was very still. She had not known Marcus had submitted that request. She had not known it had come back. She had not known what was about to happen when she walked into this room 6 minutes ago. She understood now why Beth had looked at her that morning with a particular kind of directness that she hadn't been able to fully parse. When Marcus finished, the room was quiet. Then Harmon said slowly, "You went back in for Howell." Elena looked at the table. "He was my partner," she said. "With shrapnel in your shoulder." "Yes." "And you didn't tell us that." She looked up. "It wasn't relevant," she said. "I was making a case for the dog. My record didn't—" "Your record," Ruiz said, cutting her off not unkindly, "is exactly why you're sitting in this room. Your record is why that evaluation yesterday was not a surprise to anyone who had read the whole file." He paused. "We hadn't read the whole file. That was on us." She looked at him. "I'm not interested in being an argument," she said carefully. "I know," he said. "You're interested in the job. We got that. But the job includes us knowing who we're working with. All of it. Not the version you decided was tactically relevant." He held her gaze. "You asked us to trust you. That goes 2 ways." The room absorbed that. Elena absorbed it. "You're right," she said. "Just that. No qualification." Marcus let the silence settle for a moment. Then he moved on. "The conditioning program," he said. "The one Ghost went through. Beth has been building a file." Beth opened her notes. "The program was run under a naval research designation that has since been discontinued," she said. "Its stated purpose was K9 optimization, specifically reducing handler dependency to improve operational flexibility. The theory was sound. The implementation was not." She paused. 12 dogs went through the program over 18 months. Of those 12, 2 were certified for continued service. 4 were retired early. 6 were classified as failed assets and transferred to inventory. She looked around the room. "Ghost is one of the 6. He's the only one we can currently account for." "The other 5?" Marcus asked. "I have 3 locations. 2 are still unaccounted for." The room went tight. "Unaccounted for?" Harmon said. "They dropped out of the transfer documentation 18 months ago," Beth said. "I'm still running the trail." Marcus looked at Elena. She had known this was coming. He could see it in how she was sitting. Not surprised, not relieved, just waiting for the moment when the information she'd been carrying alone became information the team was carrying with her. "You knew about the other dogs," he said. "I suspected," she said. "I found references in the transfer documents when I was tracing Ghost. There were asset numbers that didn't resolve to active placements. I didn't have access to enough of the file to confirm." She paused. "I knew Ghost. I was most focused on Ghost." "But you thought about the others." "Every day," she said quietly. Harmon leaned forward. "Elena," he said, and it was the first time anyone on this team had used her first name. She looked at him. How many people knew about this program while it was running? She thought about it carefully. "Enough," she said. "Enough people knew, and not enough of them asked the right questions at the right time. That's how these things happen, not through malice, through compartmentalization. People knew their piece. Nobody was looking at the whole picture." "And now we're looking at the whole picture," Harmon said. "Now you are," she said. "Which means," Marcus said, "this is no longer a K9 integration problem." No, Elena said. It's not. He looked at her steadily. What do you need from us? He said. And something in her face shifted, just slightly. The particular look of someone who had been carrying a weight alone for long enough that the question itself, genuine operational from people who had the means to act on the answer, landed somewhere deeper than expected. She took a breath. Access, she said. Beth needs clearance to finish the file. I need authority to request the full program documentation directly rather than through open channels. And we need someone with enough institutional rank to make a records request that doesn't get buried. She paused. The 2 unaccounted dogs. That's the priority. Whatever happened to them, whether they're in a facility somewhere or... She stopped. We need to find them. Marcus nodded. Done, he said. He looked at Beth. Fast track it. Already moving, Beth said. That afternoon, the team trained with Ghost for the first time as a full integrated unit. Not an evaluation, not a test, just operational drill, the kind of repetitive, purposeful work that built the muscle memory of unit cohesion. Marcus ran the first sequence. Ghost had accepted him during the handler transfer, but acceptance in a controlled evaluation and functional working integration were different things. Marcus knew that. So did Elena. They'd discussed it that morning in a 20-minute conversation that covered more operational ground than most handlers managed in a week. Marcus approached Ghost without ceremony. No performance, no projection. Just a person showing up consistently and calmly, and letting the dog make the assessment on his own terms. Ghost assessed him. 30 seconds of that steady reading attention. Then he looked at Elena. Elena gave nothing. She kept her face neutral, her body still. She was not going to make that decision for him. Ghost looked back at Marcus, and then with the deliberate economy of an animal, making a considered choice, rather than following a command, he took one step toward Marcus and sat. Marcus exhaled slowly. Okay, he said quietly. Good. He ran the first sequence with Ghost on his left. Elena stayed at the far edge of the training area. She didn't watch directly. She'd learned that her attention had a gravitational pull on Ghost that she had to actively manage when building his working relationship with another handler. He would feel her watching and redirect. So she kept her eyes elsewhere and listened. She listened to the rhythm of Marcus's commands, the pace, the timing, the way he adjusted when Ghost gave him feedback through body language. He was learning fast. She'd known he would. People who reached Marcus Cole's level of operational function didn't get there by being unable to read information correctly. They just sometimes received the information too late or incomplete. Give Marcus Cole complete information, and he would act on it with precision. She was learning that about him. Ruiz came to stand beside her without asking permission. He's good, Ruiz said, watching Marcus. He's excellent, she said. You sound surprised. I'm not surprised. She paused. He's adjusting faster than I expected. Most people take longer to stop trying to impose their own signal timing on the dog. Marcus doesn't impose, Ruiz said. That's actually his thing. He reads the situation and adjusts. I've never worked with another senior chief who does it the way he does. He paused. He's not leading from a position. He's leading from a read. Elena was quiet. That's what you're doing too, Ruiz said. You know that, right, with this whole thing. You didn't come in here trying to force an outcome. You laid out the truth and let us read it. I came in here to find my dog, she said. You came in here to find your dog, he agreed. And you did. And it turned out the truth of what you found was bigger than one dog. And you didn't push that on us either. You just presented it. And waited. He looked at her sideways. That's not rear support thinking. She said nothing. Where were you before the task force? He asked. She looked straight ahead. Everywhere, she said. He let it go. But he filed it. At 1700, Cody the kennel technician knocked on the operations room door. Marcus was inside with Beth working through the records trail. Sorry to interrupt, Senior Chief, Cody said. I have something you need to see. He had a tablet. He put it on the table. Marcus looked at it. It was a database entry. Naval Working Dog Inventory. An asset log. I've been running parallel searches on the other program dogs, Cody said. I know it's not technically my lane, but Lieutenant Okafor gave me access to the inventory system yesterday, and I couldn't... He stopped. I found one. Marcus leaned toward the tablet. Asset designation. Physical profile consistent with Belgian Malinois male, approximately 4 years. Current location training support activity, Virginia Beach. Status scheduled for euthanasia. Date 5 days from current. Marcus looked up at Cody. 5 days, he said. Yes, Senior Chief. And this matches the program profile. The asset number traces back to the same research designation as Ghost's original file. Cody's voice was controlled, but his hands were not entirely steady. His name in the current system is 0. He's been there for 6 months. The facility has him classified as a danger to handlers. Euthanasia recommendation was approved 2 weeks ago. Marcus stared at the tablet for 3 seconds. Then he stood up. Get Captain Ward, he said. Elena looked at the tablet for a long time. Nobody spoke. The room had gone very still in the particular way rooms went still when something shifted from abstract concern into immediate ticking reality. 5 days. 0, she said. Current designation, Cody said. What was his program designation before they renamed him? Cody scrolled. Ranger, he said. Elena closed her eyes, just for a moment. You know him, Marcus said. He was 2 kennels down from Ghost during training, she said. He was the most gifted dog in that cohort. Faster than Ghost. More precise in detection. His handler was a sergeant named Torres. She opened her eyes. Torres rotated out at the end of his contract. He didn't know what happened to Ranger. None of the handlers knew. Torres, Beth said immediately. She was already typing. He'll want to know, Elena said. Whatever happens, he'll want to know. I'll find him, Beth said. Marcus looked at Elena directly. 5 days, he said. I know. Can you do for him what you did for Ghost? I don't know, she said honestly. Ghost knew me. Ranger doesn't. He's been through the same program, possibly worse if he's been labeled a danger to handlers. He may be further along in the pattern than Ghost was. She paused. But the pattern is the same. It's always the same. They didn't break these dogs. They damaged their ability to trust. The question is whether there's enough left to rebuild from. How do you find out? Ruiz asked. I go there, she said. The facility won't release him without authority, Marcus said. I know. I can make a call, he said. 1 call. To someone with enough rank to put a hold on that euthanasia order and authorize a temporary transfer. But it has to happen tonight, before the facility closes. Elena looked at him. Make the call, she said. He was already reaching for his phone. The call took 43 minutes. Marcus made it from outside the operations room. Through the window, the team could see him pacing, not anxious, just the particular kinetic habit of someone working through a complex negotiation. He came back in at 18:23. Transfer authorized, he said. Euthanasia order is on hold pending evaluation. We have 14 days. He looked at Elena. Ranger arrives here the day after tomorrow. The room exhaled. Then Harmon said, That's 2 of the 6. Beth, where are you on the others? 3 located, Beth said. 2 confirmed in facilities, 1 with a rescue organization. She doesn't know what she has. The last 2 are still dark. Keep going, Marcus said. I haven't stopped. He looked at Elena. She was looking at the inventory entry on Cody's tablet, at the word scheduled, at the date 5 days out, that was now on hold, suspended by a phone call from a senior chief who 8 days ago hadn't known she existed. Thank you, she said. Marcus shook his head. Don't thank me yet, he said. You still have to reach Ranger. I know. And you said you don't know if you can. "I said I don't know," she confirmed. "That's different from I can't." She looked up from the tablet. Ghost was in that kennel for 4 months. He waited. He held himself together enough to wait. She paused. "If Ranger did the same, if there's any of him left, I'll reach him. And if there isn't." She was quiet for a moment. "Then we find out what's left," she said, "and we start there." Ghost knew something was happening. Elena felt it in him that evening when she went to the kennel. He was restless, not distressed, not aggressive, just alert, in the particular way that meant he was reading the air, and the air was carrying information. She sat on the floor. He came and put his head in her lap. "Yeah," she said softly. "I know." She sat with him and thought about Ranger, about what 8 months in that program had cost a dog who had been once the most gifted animal in a gifted cohort. About Torres, who was out there somewhere not knowing his dog was 5 days from an end that had been decided by people who never understood what they were working with. She thought about the 2 dogs Beth couldn't find. The dark spaces in the inventory record. She thought about what that might mean, and she pushed the thought away, because she needed to stay operational, and spiraling into what might have happened to 2 animals she couldn't yet account for was not operational. It was not useful. She would find them, or she wouldn't, and catastrophizing the outcome in advance served nobody. She thought about what Ruiz had said. "You came in here to find your dog." And it turned out the truth of what you found was bigger than 1 dog. She had known that for 2 years. She had always known that Ghost was one piece of a larger problem. That the program that had taken him had taken others. That somewhere in the system there were animals and arguably people, because programs like this didn't exist in isolation. They reflected institutional approaches that touched everything who had been labeled failed because the framework used to evaluate them was incomplete. She had known. She just hadn't had a team before. Ghost pressed his head more firmly into her lap. She put her hand on him. Outside, the base settled into night. Somewhere across the facility, Marcus was on his second call of the evening, running the institutional levers that kept 2 animals alive and gave a woman who had been fighting a system alone for 2 years the first real resources she'd had. In 2 days, Ranger would arrive. In 14 days, she would know whether she could reach him. And somewhere out there in a database record, Beth Okafor was not going to stop running until she found it 2 dogs with program designations, and no current location were either waiting or already gone. She did not know which. She stayed with Ghost until he slept. Then she went back to the operations room and sat next to Beth and started working through the files herself because there were 12 dogs in that program, and she was going to account for all 12 of them if it took every night she had until the overseas evaluation landed. Beth didn't comment on her presence. She just moved her notes to make room. They worked through the night. Ranger arrived on a Wednesday morning in a transport crate that had been bolted to the back of a government vehicle, and the first thing Elena heard before she saw him was the silence. Not vocalization. Not the low warning sound of a stressed animal. Just absolute complete silence from inside that crate, and Elena had worked with enough dogs to understand that silence like that was not calm. It was suspension. It was an animal that had learned that making any sound produced no result worth the effort. That was worse than aggression. Aggression meant there was still something fighting. Silence like that meant something had decided to stop. The transport officer handed Marcus the paperwork and kept the handoff brief. He was a young petty officer who had clearly been told to deliver the asset and not engage with the particulars. He did exactly that. He handed over the documentation, noted the transfer in his log, and left without looking at the crate once. Ghost was across the yard, held back by Cody, but his attention was entirely on the crate. His nostrils were working. His body was still but vibrating with that particular tension. That was not aggression, it was recognition. Something in the air from that crate was familiar to him, in a way that reached back through 2 years of separation and 8 months of a program that had tried to remove exactly this kind of connection. Elena watched Ghost for a moment before she turned to Ranger. She looked at the crate. The crate looked back. There were eyes in there. She could see them through the ventilation dark and fixed on her with the specific quality of an animal that had been looked at many times by many people and had learned that being looked at was the first stage of something bad happening. "Can you open it?" Marcus asked. She was quiet for a moment. "Not yet," she said. He didn't push. She crouched down, not close to the crate, 6 feet away. She put her back against the yard's perimeter fence and sat on the ground, and she did nothing. She didn't look at the crate. She didn't speak. She just sat. Ruiz watched from 20 feet back. Harmon was there too, and Cody and Beth, who had come out from the operations room when the transport vehicle arrived. Nobody spoke. The team had learned in the past 9 days the particular quality of silence that Elena required when she was working. 4 minutes passed, then 5. Then from inside the crate, a sound. Not a bark, not a whine. Something smaller, a single exhalation that might have been nothing, that might have been a dog shifting position that was just present enough to mean something was still operational inside that silence. Elena turned her head slightly, not toward the crate, just enough to change the angle. Ghost across the yard made a sound. Low, brief, the particular sound he made when he recognized something. Cody held him steady, and in the crate the eyes moved. They found Ghost. Something happened in those eyes that Elena had no clean word for. Not hope, that was too large a word for what she was looking at. More like the first micro-movement of a door that had been sealed for a very long time, just enough to let a line of light through. Something that had shut down remembered for 1 second that it had once been open. "Okay," she said softly. She moved to the crate. She sat beside it, not in front of it. Beside it, so she was not a thing standing between Ranger and the exit. She was just a presence at the edge. She spoke then, not commands, not his name. She talked the way you talk to someone in a hospital room who might not be fully conscious, because you were there, because your voice was better than silence, because you were announcing yourself as something that was not a threat. She talked about Ghost. About the training yard in the early days before the first deployment, when Ghost was 10 months old and still discovering what his body could do. She talked about the morning Ranger's kennel had been 2 doors down, about how the 2 dogs had paced the fence between them like they were having a conversation nobody else could hear. She talked for 8 minutes. And at the end of those 8 minutes, the crate door was still locked, and she hadn't moved, and nothing externally visible had changed. Except that the silence from inside the crate was different now. It was listening. Said. Ruiz caught Marcus's arm as they walked back to the operations room. "She's going to do it," he said. "You sound sure," Marcus said. "I am sure." He paused. "I've been watching her work for 9 days. She doesn't do anything that isn't strategic. Sitting on the ground, not looking at the crate, talking about the other dog, she's giving Ranger information without demanding anything in return. She's answering every question he has without him having to ask." He paused. "She's been doing that since she walked through our gate. With us too." Marcus looked at him. "Think about it," Ruiz said. "She never once pushed. She laid out the truth, demonstrated the capability, let us come to our own conclusions. She gave us information without demanding a response." He paused. "It's the same method. People and dogs." Marcus was quiet for a moment. "That," he said finally, "is either the most natural thing in the world or something that took a very long time to learn." "Could be both," Ruiz said. Marcus looked back at the yard. Elena was still beside the crate. "When did your read on her change?" he asked. Ruiz thought about it honestly. "When Ghost came out of that kennel and pressed his face to hers," he said. "I told myself it didn't mean anything. Animal behavior, handler recognition, explainable. But the sound he made..." He stopped. "I've been in combat. I've been in situations where people I trusted were in trouble, and I couldn't reach them. I know what that particular kind of relief sounds like. Ghost made that sound." He paused. "I knew right then. I just needed another day before I was willing to say it." Marcus nodded slowly. He went back inside. Ruiz stayed where he was. The first breakthrough happened at hour 3. Elena was still beside the crate. She'd been there most of the morning with 2 short breaks when Ranger pressed his nose to the ventilation and held it there. Just that. Nose to the mesh. Breathing her in. She didn't move. Cody, watching from the far end of the yard, felt something loosen in his chest that had been tight since the transport vehicle had driven away. At hour 4, Elena unlatched the crate. She didn't open it. She just unlatched it and moved back. The door swung open 3 inches on its own. Nothing came out. Elena sat. Ghost, who Cody had moved to the adjacent run where he was visible but separated, lay down with his chin on his paws and watched. 15 minutes passed. Then Ranger put one paw out of the crate. Just one paw. Placed with the particular deliberateness of an animal that was testing the ground before committing weight. Nobody in the yard made a sound. The paw stayed. Then the second one. Then slowly, Ranger moved to the edge of the crate opening and stopped there half in and half out, and looked at Elena with those dark eyes that had been through a 1.5 years of systematic removal. Elena looked back. She said one word. Not a command. His original name, the one from before the program had redesignated him. Ranger. The dog's whole body shifted. Dog's whole. Not dramatically. Not at the explosive reunion she'd had with Ghost. This was slower, more fragile, the movement of something that was not sure yet whether a word it remembered still meant what it used to mean. But he came out of the crate. He stood in the open air, and he did not run, and he did not attack, and he did not freeze. He stood there, and he let her look at him, and then, with a deliberateness that made it clearly a choice rather than a reflex, he walked to her and put his head against her shoulder. Elena closed her eyes. When she opened them, Ruiz was looking at the ground, and his jaw was doing that thing again. Cody had turned away and was very focused on something near Ghost's run that didn't require his attention. Marcus watched from the operations room window and said nothing at all. The team got the first of the 2 remaining dogs found 3 days after Ranger arrived. Beth located him through a rescue organization in Georgia. A family had adopted a Belgian Malinois from a shelter 18 months ago, been told he was high energy, found quickly that high energy didn't cover it. The dog had never bitten anyone. He'd never shown aggression toward the family's children. But he'd never relaxed either. He'd been in a constant state of operational readiness for a home environment that had no operation for him to run. The family was calling him Max. His program designation had been Bravo. Beth called the family directly. The conversation was difficult. Not because the family was resistant, they loved the dog even though they didn't fully understand him, but because explaining what Bravo was, what he'd been through, what he actually needed, required Beth to say things that no family wanted to hear about an animal they'd been sleeping next to for 18 months. She did it anyway, clearly honestly without softening it so much that the meaning was lost. The mother of the family, a woman named Carol, asked one question. "Is he going to be okay?" Beth paused. "Yes," she said. "If he gets to do what he was built for, with people who understand what that is, yes." Carol was quiet for a moment. Then, will he be happy? Beth thought about Ghost sleeping across Elena's legs on the first night. "Yes," she said. "I think so." Bravo was transferred within the week. That left one dog unaccounted for. And the record trail on that last dog, the one they'd been calling Dark 6, because there was no other designation for him, stopped cold at a facility transfer 18 months ago and did not resume. Beth had hit walls. Real ones, not bureaucratic delays. Someone had moved this record deliberately. The paper trail ended at a single entry that referenced a disposal authorization and nothing else. Elena read the entry and went very still. She sat with it for a long time. Then she went to Marcus. "I need to know what disposal authorization means in this context," she said. "It might mean standard retirement documentation. It might mean reassignment under a different classification system. It might mean—" "I know what it might mean," Marcus said. His voice was quiet. "I'm not going to stop looking," she said. I know you're not, but I need to be ready for the answer, she said. If the answer is, she stopped. I need to be ready. He looked at her. Are you? She thought about it honestly. No, she said. But I'm going to keep going anyway. He nodded once. Then we keep going, he said. The overseas evaluation was 3 weeks out when Commander Richard Haas arrived on base. He was the program director who had overseen the conditioning initiative. Nobody had invited him. He came with a JAG officer and a folder of documentation and the particular kind of institutional authority that arrived unannounced because it knew it didn't need permission. Marcus received him in the operations room. Haas was in his 50s, precise, and contained with the manner of someone accustomed to being the most senior person in any room and finding that fact completely unremarkable. He set his folder on the table without being offered a seat and sat down without being invited to. Senior Chief Cole, he said, I understand your unit has been conducting unauthorized personnel inquiries into a discontinued research program. I understand my unit has been doing its job, Marcus replied. The program in question was appropriately dissolved following a standard review, Haas said. The assets involved were transferred under proper documentation. Your unit's involvement in what appears to be an attempt to relitigate that program's outcomes is... Commander, Marcus said. He kept his voice level. With respect, we have 2 dogs from your program currently in this facility. We have located 3 others. We have confirmed that one of your 12 program assets is not accounted for beyond a disposal authorization that refers to nothing. He paused. We are not relitigating anything. We are accounting for military assets that were under your program's authority and that left that program in various states of damage. Haas's expression didn't change. The program's outcomes were evaluated and documented. By the program itself, Marcus said. Silence. The evaluation was conducted internally, Marcus said. The metrics were set by the same team that designed the protocol. There was no external review of what those animals experienced or what it did to them. He paused. There was no one in that evaluation who asked whether the program was working from the animal's perspective. Haas looked at him. Working animals are not evaluated from their own perspective, Senior Chief. They are evaluated on functional output. Then your functional output records are wrong, Marcus said. Because Ghost program designation, Ghost, one of your 6 failed assets, passed a complete SEAL K9 integration assessment 8 days ago. Handler transfer included. First clean result that animal has produced in 2 years. He held Haas's gaze. The dog didn't fail your program. Your program failed the dog. Haas was quiet for a moment. The JAG officer beside him made a note. I would like to speak with the officer who conducted that assessment, Haas said. That would be Captain Elena Ward, Marcus said. Something moved across Haas's face, very briefly. So briefly that if Marcus hadn't been watching for it, he'd have missed it. Captain Ward is not available at this time, Marcus said. I'm afraid I need to... She's working, Marcus said. With the second asset your program damaged, which is currently 3 days into what is looking like a successful rehabilitation, which means your program failed 2 of the 6 animals you labeled unsalvageable. He paused. I'm going to go ahead and predict that the number gets higher as we account for the others. Haas set both hands flat on the table. Senior Chief, he said, I would caution you against framing this as an institutional failure. The program operated within its mandate. If there were outcomes that were less than optimal, Marcus said, those outcomes are subject to the standard review process, which I am happy to initiate through appropriate channels. Good, Marcus said. Initiate it. Haas looked at him. I'm sorry. Initiate the review, Marcus said. Full external review. My unit's findings will be submitted as evidence. Captain Ward's operational assessments will be submitted as evidence. The location data on 6 program assets and the paper trail on the one we still can't find will be submitted as evidence. He met Haas's eyes without blinking. We would very much welcome a formal review, Commander. The JAG officer had stopped writing. Haas was quiet for a long moment. I'll be in touch, he said. He picked up his folder and left. The JAG officer followed. Marcus sat alone in the operations room for 30 seconds. Then he picked up his phone and called Beth. Haas just left, he said. We have maybe 48 hours before his team starts moving records. Everything you have current copies off-site backup whatever you need to do. Do it in the next 6 hours. Already running, Beth said. Of course you are, he said. He hung up. Elena found out about Haas that evening from Ruiz. She was in the training yard with Ranger, running a simple pattern work session, not operational, just the quiet back and forth of rebuilding vocabulary, teaching Ranger that signals meant consistent things, and that consistent things were safe. Ruiz sat on a bench at the edge of the yard and told her what Marcus had said and what Haas had answered and how the meeting had ended. She listened without interrupting. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. Ranger had settled beside her, tracking a scent on the air, with the alert but untroubled attention of an animal that was slowly, day by day, relearning the difference between threat and information. He came because we found the dogs, she said. Yes. He was hoping to contain it. Probably. She looked at Ranger. Did Marcus know him before today? Knew of him, Ruiz said. The program wasn't exactly advertised, but the name was in the right circles. What did Marcus think of him? Before today. Ruiz thought about it. I don't think Marcus had an opinion of him at all, he said. Until today. Today Marcus formed an opinion extremely quickly. What was the opinion? That Commander Haas is a man who is very good at not asking the questions that would complicate his answers, Ruiz said. Elena looked at the ground for a moment. That's most of the problem, she said. Not malice, just decided in curiosity. He designed a program, set the metrics, evaluated the results against his own metrics, and never once thought to ask whether his metrics were measuring the right things. She paused. The dogs didn't fail the metrics. The metrics failed the dogs. He's never considered that, because considering it would require him to have been wrong. People don't like being wrong, Ruiz said. No, she said. But being wrong is survivable. Refusing to know you're wrong keeps the damage going. She looked at Ranger. 6 dogs. 18 months of a program designed to help them, and it hurt them instead. And nobody in the chain reviewed it independently until we started pulling files. You started pulling files, Ruiz said. She shook her head. Beth pulled the files. Marcus made the calls. Cody found Ranger in the inventory. You and Harmon backed every decision in this room. She paused. I found 1 dog. The rest of this, that's a team. Ruiz looked at her. She wasn't being modest. He knew what modest looked like, and this wasn't it. She was being precise, the same precision she applied to everything. The accuracy that didn't perform either way. That just called the situation as it was. For someone who came in here alone, he said carefully, you folded into a unit very fast. I knew what the unit was, she said. I read the files before I arrived. You read our files. I read everything before I arrive anywhere, she said. He almost laughed. He'd heard her say that before to Marcus on her first day. What did our files tell you? He asked. She considered it honestly. That you were good at your jobs, she said. That you were protective of each other. That you made decisions fast and committed to them. That you hadn't had a reason yet to look at something from a completely different angle. She paused. And that you would, if one was presented correctly. He absorbed that. You trusted us before we trusted you, he said. I trusted what I read, she said. The two things aren't exactly the same. But you came in anyway. I came in for Ghost, she said. I trusted that the team around him could be reached. Those aren't the same thing either. She looked at Ranger, who had shifted slightly to press against her knee with the particular deliberateness of an animal making a choice rather than seeking warmth. But yes, I think I trusted you before you trusted me, That's usually how it goes when you walk into a room where you're the unknown quantity. Doesn't that feel unfair? She thought about it. No, she said. It feels like the job. The call came at 200. Beth had been asleep for 3 hours, which was more than she'd managed the previous 2 nights. Her phone was on the desk, and she was at the desk before it finished its second ring. The number was a Virginia area code, not one she recognized. She answered. A man's voice, controlled, careful. Is this the officer working on the K-9 program records? Who is this? She said immediately. My name is Staff Sergeant David Torres, he said. I was told to call this number by a Lieutenant Commander Okafor with Naval Special Warfare. She left a message with my mother 2 days ago. He paused. She said it was about Bravo. Beth sat up fully. Sergeant Torres, she said. Thank you for calling. Yes, it's about Bravo. Silence on the line. Then, in a voice that had been controlled until exactly that moment, is he alive? Yes, Beth said. He's here. He arrived 3 days ago. The line was quiet for 4 full seconds. I've been looking for him for a year, Torres said. His voice was steady again, but differently steady, the steadiness of someone who had been holding something at arm's length for a long time and had just been allowed to put it down. They told me he'd been transferred to a training support role. I filed requests. I called the facilities. Nobody could tell me anything. A pause. He's in rehabilitation, Beth said. He went through the same program as another dog we recovered. It caused some damage, but Captain Ward has been working with him for 3 days and he's responding. She paused. He remembered his name. Torres made a sound. Just once. Brief. Can I? He stopped. Started again. Is there a way I can? I'm going to give you a number, Beth said. Call it tomorrow morning, 0900. Ask for Senior Chief Cole. I will have already told him you called. She paused. Sergeant Torres, I want to be honest with you about what the process looks like. He's not who he was. What they did changed things. But what Captain Ward is finding is that the foundation is still there. The dog that worked with you that's still there. Another silence. He was the best dog I ever worked with, Torres said. In 8 years of this job, He stopped. I should have fought harder to keep him. You did what you could with what you were given, Beth said. That's the same thing every person involved in this story is dealing with right now. She said it quietly, without softening. Tomorrow morning, she said. 0900? I'll call, Torres said. He hung up. Beth set her phone down. She sat in the dark for a moment. Then she picked it back up and sent one message to Elena's phone. Torres called. He's coming. She saw the red receipt come back in under 30 seconds. Elena was awake. Of course she was. Send. Marcus found Elena in the operations room at 0600 when he came in for the morning assessment. She had the program files spread across the table and Beth's notes alongside them, and her own handwritten additions filling the margins of 3 separate pages. Ghost was asleep under the table. Ranger was asleep in the corner close to where Bravo had been placed the previous day, the 2 dogs gravitating toward each other with the particular ease of animals that had once shared a kennel row and still carried some residue of that shared history. Marcus looked at the room. He looked at the 3 dogs and the woman at the center of it. He thought about what he'd read in her file 3 weeks ago before he'd known what any of this would become. The thin file. The deliberately thin file. The lines that told him nothing and everything. Torres called Beth last night, Elena said without looking up. She told me. He's going to call at 0900. I'll be here. She looked up then. Marcus, she said. It was the first time she'd used his name without rank, and neither of them commented on it. The disposal authorization on Dark 6. I've been through everything Beth has. There's one more thread. He moved to the table. She pointed to an entry. The facility that processed the transfer authorization, she said. It closed 14 months ago. But the commanding officer at that facility is currently at NAS Pensacola. She paused. He might have records that didn't make it into the official transfer, or he might know what the authorization actually referred to. Marcus looked at the entry. "You think Dark 6 is alive?" he said. "I think the disposal authorization is vague enough that it might mean several different things," she said carefully. "And I think that until I know specifically what it means, I'm not going to accept the worst interpretation." She paused. "I need 48 hours in Pensacola." "The overseas evaluation is in 3 weeks," he said. "I know. You haven't slept." "I've slept." "Elena." She looked at him. "3 days ago, you hadn't slept properly in a week," he said. "You're running on mission focus and you know it. I know what that looks like. I've done it." He held her gaze. "You are not going to be operational in 3 weeks if you keep this pace." "I'll be operational," she said. "I'm sending you to Pensacola," he said. "With Ruiz. 2 days. You find what there is to find, and then you come back, and you let the overseas evaluation be what it is." He paused. "The dogs are here. The team is working the files. You don't have to carry all of it alone." She looked at him for a long moment. Ghost shifted under the table, found her foot, and pressed against it without waking. She looked down at him. Then she said quietly, "I've been carrying it alone for 2 years. "I know," Marcus said, "but you're not anymore." The room held that. Outside the base was coming alive with the sounds of morning operations. Somewhere down the hall, Cody was starting his kennel rounds. Somewhere in the facility, Torres was watching the clock move toward 0900. And under the operations table, Ghost slept with the deep, weightless ease of an animal that had finally stopped waiting. Elena looked at the files. Then she looked at Marcus. "When do we leave?" she said. They flew to Pensacola on a Thursday morning, Elena and Ruiz on a military transport that smelled like hydraulic fluid and old coffee, and Ruiz spent the first 40 minutes of the flight watching Elena read through Beth's compiled files without saying a word. She read the way she did everything completely. No skimming, no moving on before she'd extracted every piece of usable information from a page. She made notes in the margins in a handwriting that was small and precise and covered the white space on every sheet she touched. Ruiz had brought his own files. He'd opened them twice and closed them both times. Finally, he said, "Tell me what you're looking for." She didn't look up. "The commanding officer at that facility was a Commander Gerald Price," she said. "He was there for the last 4 months of the program. He signed the disposal authorization on Dark 6. She turned a page. "He also signed 3 other transfer documents in the same period. 2 of those transfers are fully documented. One of them—" She stopped. "One of them uses the same vague language as Dark 6. Asset transferred to alternate disposition per command discretion." Ruiz leaned over to look at the page. "Alternate disposition," he said. "It's not a standard transfer category," she said. "Beth ran it through the Naval Working Dog Administrative Manual. That phrase doesn't appear anywhere in official protocol." She looked up for the first time. Price created his own paperwork language, which means either he was documenting something legitimate that didn't have an existing category, or he was deliberately obscuring what he actually did. And you don't know which. "Not yet. What's your read?" She held his gaze for a moment. "I think Gerald Price is a man who knew the program was producing bad outcomes," she said. "And I think he found a way to handle 2 specific dogs that he didn't want in the official record. I think the question is whether handling them meant ending them or removing them from a system that was going to end them." Ruiz absorbed that. "That's a significant difference," he said. "Yes," she said. "It is." She went back to the file. Ruiz looked out the small window at the clouds beneath them and thought about the arithmetic of that difference and what it would mean to Elena if the answer went one way versus the other. He thought about the 2 years she'd spent following Ghost through a paper trail. He thought about what it had cost her to keep going when every channel went silent and every door closed, and the institutional machine told her repeatedly, and in official language, that the animal she was looking for was not her concern. He thought about what it would cost her now if the last thread led somewhere with no dog at the end of it. He didn't say any of that. He went back to his own files, and this time he actually read them. Commander Gerald Price had retired 14 months ago and was currently living 20 minutes from the NAS Pensacola Gate, which was either convenient or the particular kind of geographic loyalty that came from spending a career in one region. He answered his door in civilian clothes and with the immediately recognizable posture of a military man who had never quite managed to retire his bearing. He was in his early 60s, compact, with close-cut gray hair and eyes that assessed them both in the 3 seconds between opening the door and saying anything. "Captain Ward," he said. "Petty Officer Ruiz." He'd been told they were coming. Beth had called ahead. "Come in." He brought them to a sitting room and offered coffee that both of them accepted because it was the kind of offer you accepted when you were about to ask someone for something significant. He poured without ceremony and sat across from them and waited. Elena put her folder on her knee. "Commander Price," she said. "Thank you for seeing us." "You said it was about the program," he said. "Yes." "Then I've been waiting for this conversation for 14 months, he said. "So let's have it." Elena looked at him. That was not what she had expected him to say. Ruiz set down his coffee. "You've been waiting," Elena said carefully. 14 months ago, I retired early, Price said. 3 months ahead of my planned date. I told my wife it was fatigue. I told the Navy it was a family situation. He looked at his hands. Neither of those things was untrue. But the actual reason was that I spent 4 months at a facility processing the outcomes of a program I should have flagged 6 months before I arrived there, and when I finally left, I wasn't sure I could look at another transfer document without... He stopped. Let's say I needed to be done. The room was very quiet. "You knew the program was wrong," Elena said. "I knew the program's outcomes were wrong," he said. "The theory wasn't malicious. The people who designed it believed they were improving operational capability. They were removing what they identified as a liability handler dependency without understanding that what they were calling a liability was actually the core of what made those dogs exceptional." He paused. By the time I arrived, 6 dogs had been classified as failed assets. The program had been dissolved. My job was to process the transfers and close the facility. He looked at Elena. I processed 4 of the 6 through standard channels. 2 of them I didn't. Elena held very still. "Dark 6, she said. "And 1 other, Price said. "The one I couldn't document under alternate disposition because the paperwork was already drawing questions, and I didn't want 2 unexplained entries in the same period." Ruiz leaned forward. "Commander," he said, "where are those dogs?" Price looked at him. Then he stood up. "Follow me," he said. He led them through the house and out through the back door. There was a property behind the house. Not large, but enough for what it held, a kennel structure well maintained, with 2 runs side by side. And in those runs, 2 Belgian Malinois, who came to attention the moment the back door opened. Elena stopped moving. Ruiz stopped beside her. The dogs were alive. Both of them. Healthy, more than healthy, well-fed, and clearly exercised, and in the particular physical condition of animals that had been cared for with intention, rather than just managed. One of them was pacing. Not in agitation, in that alert, anticipatory way that meant someone familiar had arrived. The other was still, watching Elena. Elena's throat moved. She walked to the fence. The still one, the one who was watching her, pressed his nose to the chain link. She put her hand up. His nose found her fingers. She closed her eyes. "What are their names?" she said. Her voice was level, barely. "I've been calling them Scout and Delta," Price said. "I don't know what their names were before the program. Scout is program designation Dark 6, Elena said without opening her eyes. His name before the program was Ace. She paused. The other one is Falcon. His handler was a woman named Corporal Kim Reyes. She was medically separated 8 months ago. She doesn't know what happened to him. Price was quiet for a moment. How do you know that? He said. Because I've been running this paper trail for 2 years, she said. She opened her eyes. And because I read everything before I arrive anywhere. Ruiz made a sound that wasn't quite a laugh. Elena stepped back from the fence. She turned to Price. You took them, she said. It wasn't an accusation. It was a statement of fact offered without judgment, waiting to be confirmed. I took them, he said. I processed the paperwork as disposal, and I drove them here in my personal vehicle, and I have been caring for them on my own retirement income for 14 months. He looked at her steadily. I am fully aware that what I did could be characterized as theft of military property. I am also fully aware that the alternative was documented euthanasia of 2 operationally viable animals based on a program assessment that was fundamentally flawed. He paused. I made the choice I could live with. Ruiz looked at Price for a long moment. Then he said very quietly, That's the first time in this entire story that someone inside the system made the right call in real time. Price looked at him. I made the right call, he said. About 14 months too late. Most people never make it at all, Ruiz said. They were back on the transport by 1600 with documentation that Price had been maintaining since the day he drove 2 dogs home in his personal vehicle. Veterinary records, behavioral logs, daily notes written with the specificity of a man who understood that someday someone was going to need to know exactly what he'd done and why. Ruiz called Marcus from the airstrip. Both dogs alive, he said, in the care of the former facility commander. He took them to prevent euthanasia. He's been housing them for 14 months. 3 seconds of silence. Then Marcus said, How are they? Healthy. One of them knew Elena on site. The other one is going to take work. Ruiz paused. Marcus, this man kept records. Good ones. He's been waiting for this call. Bring them back, Marcus said. He's already loading his car, Ruiz said. He hung up. Elena was standing by the fence again, not touching it this time, just present. Ace was watching her from inside. Falcon had settled, which Price said was unusual. He'd never seen Falcon settle that fast around a stranger. He knows you're not going to take something away, Price said. She looked at him. That's what the other one responded to too, she said. Ghost, the one I've been with since the beginning. She paused. They're reading intent. They always have been. The program tried to make them less dependent on handlers by breaking their ability to read intent. But reading intent is the whole skill. That's what makes them extraordinary. She shook her head slowly. They weren't dependent. They were connected. There's a difference. Price looked at her. You should write that down, he said. I already have, she said. I've been writing it down for 2 years. Someday, someone in a position to change protocol is going to read it. Is that the plan? He said. After all this? She looked at Ace. Part of it, she said. They landed back at Coronado at 2100. The team was awake. All of them, Marcus, Ruiz, Beth, Harmon, Cody, in or near the operations room waiting. When Elena walked in, Ghost came to her immediately, the way he always did, and she put her hand on his head without breaking stride, and the room understood, from that single exchange, that whatever had happened in Pensacola had resolved into something livable. Both alive, Marcus said. Both coming here, Elena said. Price is driving. He'll be here tomorrow afternoon. Price is coming himself. He wants to do the handoff personally, she said. He's been their caretaker for 14 months. He's not going to put them in a transport crate. Marcus nodded. Beth exhaled long and slow. Harmon said, That's 6 for 6. 6 for 6, Elena confirmed. The room absorbed that. 6 dogs labeled failed unsalvageable disposed of, and every single one of them alive. Not because the system had worked, Because a retired commander had made a call in real time that his institution had not made. Because an intelligence officer had run a records trail through walls for 3 weeks. Because a kennel technician had stayed late running database searches that weren't his assignment. Because a senior chief had made one phone call on day 1 that put a hold on a euthanasia order. Because a captain had walked into a kennel on her first day at a facility where no one knew her and had refused to accept what the record said about an animal she had raised from 8 weeks old. Cody said, "What happens now with all of them?" Elena looked at him. She'd been thinking about this. Thinking about it while Beth built the file, while Marcus made calls, while she sat beside Ranger and Ace, through the slow, patient work of rebuilding trust one session at a time. She'd been thinking about what came after the rescue, because rescue wasn't an end point. Rescue was a starting point. You couldn't take 6 dogs who had been through what these dogs had been through and put them back into the system that had produced the program in the first place and expect different outcomes. The 2 who are most recovered, Ghost and Ranger, can be operationally integrated, she said. Ranger needs more time, but he's on a strong trajectory. Bravo will need at least 6 more months of rehabilitation before operational assessment. She paused. Ace and Falcon, when they get here, I don't know yet. I need to work with them. She looked around the room. But the long-term answer isn't individual rehabilitation. It's structural change. The protocol that created this program is still on the books. The framework that allowed 12 dogs to enter a conditioning study without external review or handler advocacy is still in place. She paused. Someone has to change that. That's a bureaucratic fight, Harmon said. Yes, she said. Those take years. Yes, she said again. They do. And you're going to start it anyway, he said. Not a question. I started it 2 years ago, she said. I just didn't have anything to show for it yet. Marcus looked at her. You'll have the external review findings, he said. Haas requested it. We're going to make sure he regrets that request by making it the most thorough review this program has ever received. Every dog accounted for. Every outcome documented. Every assessment Captain Ward has produced since arriving on this base as supporting evidence. He paused. The review becomes the foundation. The foundation becomes the policy argument. That could take 2 years on its own, Ruiz said. Then it takes 2 years, Marcus said. Elena, do you need to be here for the overseas evaluation, or do you need to be in Washington building the policy case? She looked at him. I need to finish what I started here first, she said. The evaluation, the integration, making sure Ghost and Ranger are placed correctly with handlers who understand them. She paused. And I need Torres to see Bravo. Torres arrived 2 days before the overseas evaluation. He came in civilian clothes, a tall man in his mid-30s with the self-contained bearing of someone who had spent years in operational environments and never quite brought all of himself back out. He drove a rental car. He came alone. He had called ahead to speak with Marcus, and the conversation had been brief and professional, but Cody had overheard the end of it and said later that Torres's voice had done the same thing Ruiz's jaw did when something was rearranging a conclusion. Elena met him at the gate. She'd thought about whether to brief him first what the program had done, what Bravo's current state was, what to expect. She decided against a full briefing. Briefings managed expectations, and managed expectations were sometimes the same as managed grief. She didn't want to give him a framework that would filter what he was about to experience. I'm Elena Ward, she said. David Torres, he said. He looked at her directly. You found him. We found him, she said. Beth said he's that it did something to him. Yes, she said. I want you to see it yourself rather than me describe it. Your read on him is going to be more accurate than anything I can tell you. He nodded, once the particular kind of nod she'd learned to read, as the military equivalent of, I'm holding it together and I'm going to keep holding it. She led him to the kennel. She stopped outside the run. I'll stay out here, she said. This should be between you. Torres looked at her. Something in his face shifted. He went in alone. Elena stood outside the run and looked at the wall above the kennel and listened. The first sound was bravo. A single vocalization, the same kind Ghost had made when she walked through the door on day one. High and broken and not at all military and not at all composed. Then silence. Then Torres's voice, very quiet, saying a name she didn't recognize. A private name. The kind of name handlers gave dogs that never appeared in any official record. She walked to the far end of the kennel row and stood there until it was appropriate to go back. When she did, Torres was on the floor of the run with Bravo across his lap, one hand moving the way her hand had moved across Ghost on the first night, and his face was not composed at all, and he wasn't doing anything about that. She opened the run door. She sat down on the outside of it. Neither of them said anything for a long time. Finally, Torres said, "How long does it take to get him back?" "He's already back," she said. "The dog you knew is in there. What the program did was damage the surface layer, his ability to trust the approach of someone new. You're not someone new. You saw how fast that dropped." He nodded. He was looking at Bravo. "What does he need?" he said. "Time," she said. "Consistency. Someone who comes back the same way every time. Someone he can read correctly." She paused. "You could stay." He looked at her. "Here," he said. "There's a rehabilitation program forming," she said. "It doesn't have a name yet. It doesn't have official standing yet. But it has 6 dogs and a facility that has agreed to host it and a policy review that's going to run in parallel." She paused. "It needs handlers who already have a relationship with the dogs. It needs people who know how to come back the same way every time." He was quiet for a long time. "I'm 6 months into a private sector contract," he said. "I know," she said. "I read your file?" He looked at her with something that was almost a smile. "You read everyone's file," he said. "I read everything before I arrive anywhere," she said. He looked back at Bravo. Bravo was asleep. Torres watched him breathe for a long moment. "Tell me about the program," he said. "The one you're building." She told him. The overseas evaluation happened on a Friday. Full SEAL team assessment, external evaluation board, a scenario that had been classified until 6 hours prior. Ghost ran point on the K9 component with Marcus as primary handler and Elena as tactical coordinator. A role that hadn't existed in the unit structure before her arrival, and that she'd defined herself in 3 weeks of integration work by simply doing it until it had a shape. The scenario involved the detection component under time pressure, a tracking element with 3 directional shifts, and a controlled aggression sequence that ended with a recall under live noise distraction. One of the hardest conditions to run because noise distraction hit a dog's nervous system in ways that could override training in animals that hadn't been worked in exactly those conditions. Ghost ran the entire scenario clean. When the recall came under the noise sequence, he turned on the second repetition of the command and came back in a straight line without hesitation, and the evaluation board member who had been running the timer set it down and looked at his scoring sheet, and then looked at Ghost, and then looked at Marcus. "That's the animal with the prior unsatisfactory assessment history," he said. "Yes," Marcus said. "Full K9 integration assessment passed 6 days ago." "Yes." The board member wrote something. Then handler, Senior Chief Marcus Cole primary, Captain Elena Ward tactical coordinator. He looked at Elena. She was standing at the far edge of the evaluation area, with her arms at her sides, watching Ghost complete his return, and her expression was the same expression she'd worn through the entire assessment, not triumphant, not relieved. Focused. Present. The expression of someone doing their job. "Captain Ward," the board member said. She looked at him. "Noted," he said. 1 word. But she understood what it meant from a formal evaluation board. It meant her name was going into the report attached to this result. It meant what she had done here was on the record cleanly in a way that couldn't be buried or redacted or dismissed. Ghost came to her side. She put her hand on his head. "Good," she said. Just that. 3 weeks after the evaluation, Commander Haas received the external review findings. 67 pages. Every dog accounted for. Every program outcome documented against the original research objectives. Elena's operational assessments. Beth's records trail. Price's 14 months of personal documentation submitted voluntarily and in full. Marcus was told later by someone who had been in the room that Haas read the first 12 pages without speaking, then set the document down and asked everyone else to leave. They left. He sat alone with 67 pages of what his program had actually done, and he was in that room for a long time. The review went forward with a formal finding of protocol failure. The conditioning program was flagged for comprehensive review. A recommendation was issued for an independent K9 welfare assessment framework to be established before any future behavioral modification research could be approved. It was not everything Elena had argued for, but it was a foundation. Hint. 6 months after Elena Ward arrived at Coronado with one backpack and a folder of transfer documents, the unit ran its first formal training session under what was now officially designated the K9 Operational Integrity Program. 6 dogs, 4 handlers, Elena Torres and 2 operators from the SEAL team who had put in the request themselves after watching Ghost work for 3 months and deciding they wanted to understand what they'd been watching. A 5th handler, a young petty officer named Carver, who'd heard about the program from Cody and applied before it had an official application process. Marcus stood at the back of the training yard and watched. Ruiz came and stood beside him. They watched Elena move through the session with the particular economy that had never changed. No wasted motion. No performance. Just the steady, precise work of someone who knew exactly what she was doing and didn't need anyone else to know that she knew. Ghost was beside her. Ranger was working with Torres across the yard. Bravo was running a detection pattern with Carver, who was learning fast and listening carefully and making the exact mistakes that people made when they stopped treating animals like equipment and started treating them like partners. Good mistakes, learning mistakes, the kind that meant you were paying attention to the right things. She could have gone anywhere, Ruiz said. Marcus looked at him. After the evaluation results, Ruiz said. After the review finding. She had offers. I know she had offers. Beth told me there were 3 separate commands that submitted requests to have her transferred. He paused. She stayed. She stayed because the program isn't finished, Marcus said. The program won't be finished for years. No, Marcus said. It won't. Ruiz watched Elena correct Carver's positioning with one quiet word and a small gesture, and Carver adjusted immediately, and Bravo responded to the adjusted signal with the clean precision that was becoming his new normal. She's good at this, Ruiz said. Not just the dog handling, the teaching. She knows how to give someone exactly enough information and then let them find the rest themselves. Same method, Marcus said. Ruiz looked at him. She said that to me, months ago. People and dogs. He paused. She doesn't tell you what to think. She gives you what you need to think correctly. Then she waits. Ruiz was quiet for a moment. She did that with us, he said. From the first day, Marcus said. They stood and watched. Ghost moved through a pattern and came back to Elena's side, and she acknowledged him with a hand signal that was smaller than anything Ruiz could have consciously registered, and Ghost settled, and the session continued, and the training yard was full of the particular productive noise of a team that had become something larger than the sum of what it had originally been. Torres found Elena at the kennel that evening, the way people always found her. She was where the dogs were when she wasn't where the work was, and most of the time those were the same place. He'd been at the facility for 5 weeks. Bravo was moving well. Torres had integrated into the program with the focused, determined energy of a man who was making up for lost time and knew it. He sat on the bench outside Ghost's run. Ghost was inside asleep in the particular boneless way he slept, now fully committed to rest. Nothing held back the sleep of an animal that had stopped keeping one eye on the door. "Can I ask you something?" Torres said. Elena sat on the ground nearby, her default. "Yes," she said. "When you came here," he said. "When you first walked in, did you know it would become this, the program, the review, all of it?" She thought about it honestly. "No," she said. "I came for Ghost. Just Ghost." "Just Ghost," she said. "Everything else I knew, the problem was bigger. I'd known for 2 years. But I didn't have the means to address it alone. I couldn't build a policy argument with one person and a paper trail and no institutional standing." She paused. "I needed a team. I just had to find the right door." And we were the right door. She looked at Ghost through the fence. "You were the door Ghost was behind," she said. "Everything else followed from that." Torres was quiet for a moment. "What would you have done if it hadn't followed?" he said. "If the team had dismissed you? If the evaluation hadn't worked? If—" "I would have found another door," she said simply. "You sound certain." "I am certain," she said, "because the alternative was leaving them where they were." She looked at Torres. "You spent a year looking for Bravo. You called facilities. You filed requests. You hit walls. And you kept going." She paused. "You already know the answer to your own question." He looked at his hands. "Yeah," he said quietly. "I guess I do." Ghost shifted in his sleep, found a better position, settled deeper. The evening was cooling, and the base was going quiet, and somewhere in the facility, Ranger and Bravo and Ace and Falcon were in their runs, each of them further along than they'd been yesterday, each of them daily, relearning what the program had worked so hard to take from them. That trust was not a liability. That connection was not a weakness to be conditioned out. That the thing which made them extraordinary was exactly the thing the program had tried to remove. And it had survived anyway in Ghost's 4 months of waiting and Ranger's single listening silence in Ace, pressing his nose to the fence in Falcon, settling for a stranger who arrived without threat. Because some things were built deeper than any program could reach. Elena Ward had known that. She had known it for 2 years, in the dark of a paper trail that went nowhere, in the silence of channels that closed, in the institutional language that told her the animal she'd built that knowledge with was not her concern. She had known it, and she had kept going, and she had found the right door, and she had walked through it alone with one backpack and a folder of documents, and she had said the one word that stopped everything. And nothing after that had been the same. She sat outside Ghost's run in the cooling evening and listened to him breathe, and for the first time in 2 years she was not planning the next step, or running the next thread, or carrying the weight of what came next. She just sat. Ghost slept. And the work they had started together, the work that had no clean ending, that would run for years through policy rooms and training yards, and the slow, patient sessions where trust got rebuilt, one honest exchange at a time, that work was no longer hers alone to carry. It never should have been, but it had taken a dog who remembered, and a team that learned to look past what the record said, and one retired commander who made the right call 14 months too late, but still in time to prove what Elena Ward had known from the beginning, that the ones labeled broken were never broken at all. They were simply waiting for someone who knew the difference.